broke the story, ESPN guy or whoever it was, I replied to the tweet. I said, "This must mean Marvin Jones is out for the year." I mean, at that point there wasn't any news about it.
I saw when you tweeted that, and you were dead on. You were dead on about that because an hour later, the news starts to come out that he was out for the season.
So Little's just to make sure they have the right number of bodies. Little, the veteran, he's not going to do any damage on the sideline, I think is the way they viewed it. But last week, it was last Saturday morning on my daily blog on Facebook, Fantasy Football for Winter site, I highlighted two guys who I thought were good desperation receiver pickups in the injuries equal opportunities vein. I hit one and missed one, but the point is, if you picked up one of those guys, you had a 50-50 shot of getting great value. And the two guys were Corey Fuller in Detroit, with Calvin Johnson going down. Corey Fuller moved into the number 2 spot. And then Brandon Tate in Cincinnati, with A.J. Green out and Marvin Jones out, slide into that number 2 spot for the Bengals. And Brandon Tate scores a touchdown instantly. If you were desperate for a receiver, if you had guys on bye, and you just needed 8 or 9 or 10 points, you got them in Brandon Tate. So I'm picking those guys again tentatively. If Green and Calvin Johnson sit, both those guys still stand a good chance of getting 7, 8, 9, 10 points, as long as they can play, most every snap, which they will if they're starting.
You know what? While we're talking here about wide receivers and injuries, I mentioned Cruz and how I replaced him. But, a lot of people are, the easy thing, and I've seen this on every fantasy site this week, Ruben Randall, Odell Beckham. The thing with me is I had no interest in replacing Victor Cruz with another New York Giant. Victor Cruz wasn't doing that well for me.
That's right.
And he's Victor Cruz. I don't know that I wanted to go with any, I don't want to say unknown. I mean, I know who Beckham is, obviously, and Randall, but I'm not interested in some other Giant that's not Victor Cruz.
You and I are on the exact same page. I actually tweeted a guy about it earlier today with the exact same message. He was trying to figure out whether to pick up and start Ruben Randall. And my position was Victor Cruz had 2 good games this year in 5.5 games.
Yeah,
so if you have 2 good games in 5.5 games and you're the number 1 receiver on that team, then what's to say that Ruben Randall and Odell Beckham are in any better position to come in and be anything better than an every other week or every third week fantasy starter? And that's really what you're looking at on that team. The offensive line is a mess. Eli Manning is not a great quarterback. Eli Manning has never been a great quarterback. Eli Manning had one pretty good year. I think he threw about 4,000 yards, 36 touchdowns, which is pretty good by today's standards, but not outstanding. And then the rest of his career, he's been okay. He's generally a 25, 28 touchdown guy. He's 1.5, 1 3/4 touchdowns a game. So you're really taking a lot of chances in the system. Everyone was high on Eli Manning, 10 days ago, saying, "Oh, well, finally Eli Manning's figured it out." Well, he didn't figure it out. He had a good game against a team that he needed to beat, and the fact is, Eli Manning is still Eli Manning, and to trust Ruben Randall and Odell Beckham to be every week starters, I think is way offline. I think those guys might occasionally be good, but I'd rather look like what you did with Andre Holmes.
Yeah, it's like my thought process on that is, okay, listen, if Josh Gordon, now I'm not talking about this season, let's look at last season. Let's say Josh Gordon goes down in week 10. None of you were running out to sign up Greg Little, and I don't even know who else was on the depth chart at that point. But just because number 1 went down does not always mean that number 2 and number 3 are going to do better. Sometimes it means they're going to do worse. And I don't think, think that this may be, this may be, I don't know, man. I don't want to say because Tom Coughlin, he never dies, but this may be the end of the road for him, man. I mean, if this season falls off the tracks over there, who knows?
Yeah,
Anyways,
and we say injuries equals opportunities, but injuries doesn't equal success. It's not the same thing. And your listeners, a lot of them know that, but it's important to remind them that this is just because a guy gets injured doesn't mean the guy replacing him is just as capable.
No. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Hey, while we're talking about wide receivers, I've got Ray here on Twitter. Says, I'm seriously debating dropping Keenan for Floyd. What do you think at the wide receiver position there? I would assume it would be Keenan Allen for Michael Floyd.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's Michael Floyd. Although if somebody dropped Michael Floyd, that might be a mistake. You might be talking about Malcolm Floyd.
Malcolm Floyd could be. I'm not sure because he just said Floyd here.
For San Diego, because Malcolm Floyd's probably available in a lot more leagues. But if it's Michael Floyd, regardless of who it is, I think people are. Here's the thing. Let's take a step back here. Keenan Allen entered the season. He was, I think, my 10th ranked wide receiver, which some of your listeners are right now wondering why I'm on the show. How can you have this guy on it? Keenan Allen is a top 10. Well, Keenan Allen did amazing stuff last year in, 15 games, 14 games.
He sure did.
He's a legit star. He's 22 years old. And I wrote a post about 6 days ago, highlighting the 4 things that people need to think about before they go ahead and drop someone. And the first thing is, are they hurt? Second thing is, have they moved down the depth chart? Are they no longer starting, essentially? Third thing is there some kind of offensive line issue or quarterback issue or something else that is adversely impacting that player. And the fourth thing is, are they over the hill? In other words, are they past their prime, so it's going to be harder for them to recover from whatever, downside they're facing. Keenan Allen is the opposite of all 4 of those things. Unless he has an injury that nobody talks about, he is primed to be, once again, 1,000-yard, 8-touchdown guy. Now, it sounds unbelievable, but the mistake that people make is, I'm going to drop this guy because he's not doing well. Past results do not dictate what will happen in the future. I actually play fantasy baseball in my spare time, and this year I made the mistake of dropping a guy who I shouldn't have. I dropped Jake Peavy. Jake Peavy, a good, perennially good pitcher, had a tough time with the Red Sox this year, went over to San Francisco, had, I think, a bad game, one of his first 2 games, and I just said, forget it, I'm dumping him, I'm going to take somebody else. Peavy then went on a tear, because Peavy's Peavy. Peavy's a gamer, especially in the National League. Few people over the last 10 years have been as good as Jake Peavy in the National League, in my opinion, especially when he was in his prime. Keenan Allen is my equivalent of Jake Peavy in that people who drop Keenan Allen are going to regret it. It's not a matter of when. It's a matter, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I think it's going to happen as soon as this week. And if he has 2 or 3 straight 100-yard games, it would not shock me. And in fact, if he doesn't have 2 or 3 straight 100-yard games, that would be more surprising.
Interesting. Talking to BJ Rudell, Fantasy Football for Winners here. And since wide receivers are out there, I've got a question for you. We're looking at guys with injuries and opportunities. And this is a guy I've been, I'm a little intrigued with here. Davante Adams over at Green Bay. My non-starting wide receivers, I got Justin Hunter, Jordan Matthews, Andre Roberts. Those are my 3 bench wide receivers there that I'm hoping have stronger second halves of the season than they did in the first half. And do you think Davante Adams has a chance to be more valuable to the bottom of my roster than any of those 3 that I threw out there?
Yeah, you said Davante Adams, Justin Hunter, and
Matthews and Andre Roberts.
And Matthews, yeah, I think possibly. It's tough. I think that Justin Hunter probably is my favorite, except the team he plays on is not conducive to passing touchdowns. And Jake Locker is not the answer in Tennessee. I think the sooner Tennessee understands that, the sooner they can rebuild around more of a franchise quarterback. So given the fact that Aaron Rodgers is throwing the ball, Davante Adams probably has the edge, but I think Justin Hunter as a starting opposite Kendall Wright, and what he did in the preseason, Hunter looked fantastic. I still give Hunter the overall edge if Jake Locker can figure things out. So between those 2, it's probably the answer. I picked Jordan Matthews as a top 25 receiver at the start of the season. It was one of my 10 bold predictions.
Yeah.
I may not get that one right. I do think Jordan Matthews is a beast, and I think within the next 2 years, he will be an elite receiver in this league. I think I just picked him prematurely. In a keeper league, Jordan Matthews is a must-keep based on what he showed in the preseason and what he showed in brief flashes in Philly. But the problem is there's too many weapons. There's 5 offensive weapons in the passing game, plus Darren Sproles, plus LaShawn McCoy. It's hard for a guy like Matthews to be a regular contributor, and that's why Davante Adams and Justin Hunter, at least they're getting touches. At least they're getting attention. And I think if you just do a coin flip between those 2, you should be all right.
All right, let me switch to tight end because I've got a question that I think a lot of people may have ran into last week without even realizing that the tight end situation in Washington, Jordan Reed, gets healthy. And a lot of people, like myself, targeted Niles Paul. I think you picked him up in at least one of your leagues too. But
yeah, I did.
Clearly, he is not going to be as effective as he was going forward. Is he somebody worth keeping on your roster, or do you think that that he would be best off freeing up that spot for somebody you could use more?
Yeah, if you're in a very deep league, for example, when it comes to Niles Paul, if you're in a deep league, you might as well hold him as a handcuff. But Jordan Reed, I was very high on him in the preseason, and I think everyone needs to have Jordan Reed on their team if they can get him. He is an elite tight end, and I don't want to understate that. What he did last year in limited time, you look at his numbers, and I don't have them in front of me, but it projected out, he would have been a top 4 tight end. That's how good he was. And it was just because of risk of concussion, and now, what he did to his ankle or foot, or his hamstring a few weeks ago. So Jordan Reed is a legit deal, and he showed last week that he can do it even with Niles Paul on the field. Niles Paul right now is a guy you just got to hope if you have him. You have to hope that somehow he's able to step up, and you don't want to ever hope for injuries, obviously, but in the game of fantasy football, you have to hope that Niles Paul gets more involved in the offense. And right now, with Jordan Reed, on all cylinders, what he did last week against a very tough Arizona defense in Arizona shows that Jordan Reed will continue to outproduce Niles Paul by miles as long as he stays healthy.
Interesting. Wanted to ask you about that one. I had another. I got to pull it up. I've got them in different rooms here. I got a tight end question for you here. Jace Amaro, a viable pickup, or was last weekend a fluke?
No, it wasn't a fluke. I've had my eye on Amaro, and unfortunately, and I still able to pick him up, but unfortunately I didn't pick him up last week, and I didn't pick him up the week before. I kept telling myself I'm going to pick him up, because Jimmy Graham was going on by, and decided to pick up Eric Ebron instead, and, didn't work out. So Jace Amaro was, I think he was my preseason 14th ranked tight end, right on the cusp of being an every week starter. He is a guy who, if he were in a different system, on a different team, with a better quarterback and just a better team all around, Amaro could be a legitimate star. He could be easily a top 7, top 8 tight end. He has all the tools. The problem is he's a rookie, so he's not going to be as consistent, and he plays in a system where the quarterback is not as talented at giving the ball as a lot of quarterbacks in the league. So I think Amaro is a fantastic pickup if you understand that what he did last week is not going to happen every week, but that he's fully capable if the quarterback's willing.
There you go. There's the answer to your question there, Charles. Looking at some of the other tight ends, like I'm just looking at some of the ones out here, such as in our league. You got names such as Clay Harbor out there. You've got Corliss from Green Bay, Gresham from Cincinnati. Any of those names strike you as somebody that you got to have if they're available?
Yeah, Harbor. I mean, you might want to go Harbor, although the faith in the Browns defense that did wonders last week. And in fact, I mentioned this last week on the show, I believe. The Tennessee Titans were a streaming defense against the Jaguars, because anyone facing the Jaguars is a great defense. And the Browns are far and away better defense than Tennessee. And Tennessee, I think, was 8th best defense in fantasy last week against Jacksonville. Cleveland could completely shut down Jacksonville. So people want to be mindful of that. Clay Harbor is an interesting get. But when you've got Cecil Shorts and Allen Robinson and Allen Hearns, and maybe a return of Marquise Lee and Ferm Johnson getting 10 to 15 carries, you have to wonder, is Clay Harbor going to be good for about six targets, maybe 4 catches, 50, 60 yards? Are you going to be content with that as an optimal amount, for most weeks, with maybe an occasional score, but not often? If you're okay with that, go for it. But Clay Harbor is not a primary option in that offense. But with all the injuries going on, and the 3 rookies playing on that team, plus Cecil Shorts, that's where Harbor's been picking up the slack. I think his value will go down as the year goes on as Robinson and Hearns get more involved.
All right. Well, you convinced me that it's not a big deal to drop Niles Paul for Clay Harbor, so thank you for that one.
Right.
I'll adjust my bench accordingly. Meanwhile, let's look around the league. Calvin Johnson, another one. Injuries just pile up when you get to this time of the season. Calvin Johnson, I won't mess with him ever since he ruined the entire tail end of my season a couple of years ago, man. When Calvin Johnson decides he's not playing, and right now he's not playing.
Yeah, it's tough. You look at all the first-round picks this year. AJ Green was one of them for a lot of in a lot of leagues. You got Jimmy Graham with a first-round pick. You had Calvin Johnson, LaShawn McCoy. Although I think McCoy is I've been mentioning this for a couple weeks now. That all over Twitter, people can see my fingerprints on it. McCoy is going to return to elite status. It will happen as sure as Keenan Allen will. Eddie